What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Welcome back to America Trends. That's John in the background. It's always good to be comforted by his soothing laughter. And I'm Larry Rifkin, and thank you again for coming to us. And John, today, this is kind of a first because somebody sought us out as a podcast thinking that the content that a person that this publicist was representing was perfect for our podcast. And she went scouring the internet looking for podcasts that were looking at the future of our country, our economy, and she thought that we were absolutely just the right fit.
Well, that's a wonderful thing. People are out there listening, and they found us, and they put us together. I think that's cool. That's
Absolutely.
really
And if you know of a guest who you think would be a perfect complement to what we do on America Trends, please let us know who that person is. And we would certainly take you seriously. If you're listening, we do. And I will tell you, the other day I ran into somebody who came up to me at an event and said, I saw you at an event that I had done here in the state of Connecticut, and I started listening to your podcast, and it's a retired doctor, and he said he loves the podcast. So it's wonderful when you actually meet people because the engagement online isn't quite the same.
No, it's not. It's not. It's, so that you're right. That is good when you get emails like that and stuff that say, hey, we're listening and this is good.
Absolutely. Well, the guest that we have for you today, depending upon whether you want to have the Danish translation or the American alliteration, it's either Jarl or Jarl. And he didn't mind either reference, Jensen or Jensen. But the J becomes
it looks
the Y.
like Jensen.
Yeah, exactly. Well, whatever you want to do, John.
Okay.
I mean, feel free.
All right.
In the quiet of your own home, you can call me whatever you want, which I'm sure you do. But the book is called Optimizing America. It's a political thriller, but it is underpinned by a lot about our economy that somebody like him, who is a really innovative thinker, who has looked at so many different ways to contribute to our society. At 16 years of age, Jarl was a writer already, an inventor who contributed with his father to a successful patent that led to the launch of a wound care company called Euromed. So he's a very innovative guy, but he really wanted to help take away some of the mysteries about our economy and how it works. And I know a lot of people think that there's this invisible hand controlling
Well, I
the
kind of
economy.
believe that. I think that the banks and big money is pulling the strings. I think it seems like every administration has people from either the Fed or from
Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. I mean, it just, I don't know. There's a connection there somewhere.
Citigroup.
I don't want to start anything.
Oh, I hear you. No, I'm Chase. Yeah, I get you. I remember when Barack Obama was putting his cabinet together and everybody thought they were going to be more populist. And then he had a lot of people from the establishment realm. Yeah. Well, he does talk about that. He does talk about the banks, the Federal Reserve, and what role they play. He wants to try to help us find out why the economy is rigged for the wealthy. But I want to say this, that if you're listening to us and you're worried because it's a political thriller that is the basis, it's fiction. But again, a lot of the tenets of the book are built on what he understands about the economy. We are not going to give away any of the elements of the fictional account that he represents in his book. We're not going to do that. So you can feel free to come to us. No, we don't want to do that, John. John, what I wonder about, because we get so many nonfiction books given to us, and I'm really wondering if anybody's reading a lot of nonfiction anymore, because everybody I see is going for a good fiction, a good, romance novel, or they're going for something that's a little bit more about a crime that, we can only imagine was committed. No?
Well, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe they want to get away from the real world for a little bit. But I don't know. There's so many books being printed. I think there's people reading these books. I really do.
Well, how
And
do
I
they
enjoy
read them
reading
now? I mean, are they reading them on a Kindle? Are they actually taking a book from a library?
Yeah, it's a good question.
What do you think's going on out there, John?
You know what? I think we need to investigate this.
That would be a good one, the future of reading in America.
Because I find reading off a Kindle and stuff very awkward. And,
Yeah.
I mean, a book, I can put a bookmark in, I can find my place. I find it very, very awkward, but I didn't grow up with that, so.
But, John, I do think you can resume where you left off. I do think there's a mechanism, and you're the technologically advanced between the two of us.
Yeah, well, I am, but I just find it awkward. I don't know why. It's just weird.
Well, listen, I want to give a shout out to Rose O'Connor, who's the publicist who put us in touch with Jarl. And we hope that you're happy with the outcome of the search that you did to find America Trends. We're glad that we found him and the book, Optimizing America. On the line with us on America Trends is Jarl Jensen. He's an expert in business innovation and economics, and he has written a book called Optimizing America. Jarl, explain to us, the book itself is a novel, but you're trying to drive home a lot of points about our economy and our society.
That's right. Economics tends to be something that people shun or find boring, and so I wanted to make economics more interesting by writing a story about a presidential candidate who has a new political philosophy, who has a road to a future that's different than what's offered to the public today. And by writing in a fun, interesting, sort of thrilling story, perhaps these economic messages can hit home and readers can start looking at not only the future differently, but Republicans and Democrats differently, at governance differently, and sort of show them how by understanding economics better and showing them some new economic ideas, that through the power of voting, we can perhaps create a better future for all of us.
Without giving away too much of the story or telling us too much about the protagonist, give us a little taste of what the novel suggests and who we really should pay attention to once we pick it up.
The novel suggests that economics, the economy as a whole, is run by commercial banks, and that's actually true. The Federal Reserve is actually a corporation owned by commercial banks. That means that all money flows start with loans created by banks. And banks fund these loans by going to the Federal Reserve and getting money printed for the purpose of their commercial loans. And the premise is really, what happens if we kick the bankers out and start being creative about how to run the economy? And what that does is fundamentally game-changing, and the book, lets the reader sort of experience what could happen if we got that done.
The Federal Reserve is in the news these days. They tried something radical, that quantitative easing, and going into negative interest rates and the like. And you suggest that by virtue of doing that, they actually are taking away jobs and lessening the impact of humanity against the machine.
Well, it's obvious. A robot or technology is very expensive to create, whereas an employee, from minute number one, they have to start making money for their employer. And that's obvious, right? You're not going to hire somebody if they're not going to make money for you. That's not why you hire people. You hire people to make you money. Technology is different. Robots are different if you have it. Automation is different. The reason is that use resources, technology, buy all these things, put them together, sell them as a package to a company, and that technology then has to save money for the company by letting that company fire people. So For example, if a company spends $100,000 a year on 4 employees, the robot then with a $500,000 price tag would save the company money after 5 years. But in order to fund that initial investment in that robot or technology, a bank steps in and says, here, we'll give you $500,000, and then the machine will pay for itself over time. And you can pay me back by the savings that that robot offers you. So technology, the advancement of technology is directly correlated to the ability of banks to provide funding for that technology. If it wasn't that way and if interest rates were higher, most of these technologies wouldn't be viable and people would be keeping their jobs.
So you say the Federal Reserve, in effect, has more to do with the creation of the iPhone than Steve Jobs himself.
Yeah, isn't that quite a statement?
Yeah, that is. So as we look at it today, now interest rates are beginning to go up slowly. Will that diminish the impact of automation versus human?
Well, sure. I mean, every day you have an accountant in a company, and they will look at an investment, maybe some technology and the return on that investment. Is it going to be 6 years, 7 years, 8 years? The higher the interest rate, the longer it's going to take to pay off the investment in that technology. So absolutely, higher interest rates are good for jobs. It's converse to a lot of thinking, because the way the economy works today is that the Federal Reserve or commercial banks, they lower interest rates in order to spur more borrowing. And that borrowing hopefully creates more money flows into the economy, and that will hopefully creates more jobs. But it's catch-22, right? Well, number one, borrowed money has to be paid back, so that means less money in the future. And obviously, as well as we've been saying, that borrowing is oftentimes also used for replacing people with technology.
When we look at our economy, it is a reflection of our political atmosphere and our socio-cultural standards. Where is America today? I mean, you talk about in your book optimizing America, trying to look at a new paradigm. Where are we today?
Today, we are in a place where the general population thinks that our government is responsible for the economy. And really it isn't. And the founding fathers that wrote the Constitution never saw it that way either. The commercial banks the Federal Reserve runs, owns, and operates our money flows. They are responsible for our economy. And until we start being more creative about how money is created, what it's used for, and how we maintain and operate our economy, governance, our politicians really just don't have the power or in my opinion, the creativity to understand that we got to change the Federal Reserve if we want to improve our economy.
So are you one of those like Ron Paul who would like to see it eliminated or reformed?
I would agree with reformed. I just find Ron Paul's ideas backwards. I almost find that he's not quite understanding it. For example, when the government borrows money, that isn't turning on printing presses. Some would say technically it is, but it isn't, because those that borrow money is funded by treasury bonds. Money is really printed for mortgages, credit cards, and the like, or business loans. So I don't really agree with what Ron Paul is saying about the Federal Reserve, but I definitely do agree that when we can get the change to happen there, that changes fundamentally everything, not only for America, but for the whole world.
Let's go back to 2008, 2009, and the bubble that burst, and the impact of that, and the way we responded to it with this quantitative easing. What does this mean, and where are we today in relation to that?
Quantitative easing was the only way for the previously and current regime or economic system to continue itself. Basically, the banks had to be funded with massive amounts of cash into their accounts in order to create money, to get money to flow again. Problem, of course, is today we're basically worse off than we were back then. Housing prices are now exceeding the prices they were back then. Debt around the world is much higher than it was back then. The next economic collapse, basically, the only thing that they have for an answer is more quantitative easing. And as we started the talk with, quantitative easing pushes the cost of borrowing money down, making technology cheaper, driving more people out of the labor force permanently. This is not what we need, especially in those situations. Now, as you may know, Optimizing America is not my only book. I also have a free book available on Amazon called Hacking the American Economy, and I lay out in as simple language as I can how you can actually engineer the economy from the perspective of the Federal Reserve in a way that allows for maximizing our standard of living, bringing unemployment down near zero. I mean, let's talk about employment for a second. The Federal Reserve considers, 5% unemployment, full employment. That's 10 to 12 million people unemployed. That's crazy. The only reason why they need that is because they fear inflation and the raising of interest rates. And higher interest rates for banks is bad news. Why? That means they then get to sell their product. They have to sell their product at a higher price, which means fewer loans. And that's bad for business for banks. So they do everything they can to keep interest rates
But we're
low.
told that the economy is so hot right now, and yet the Federal Reserve, I think on the day that we are now taping this, they're keeping their rates where they are, but they have been ticking up just a little bit, and yet it's not having that impact in terms of putting a lid on the economy yet.
Well, I do think that has a little bit to do with our president and him sort of saying his whole objective has been to keep interest rates low, because the Federal Reserve before was raising interest rates pretty aggressively, and now the economic numbers are coming in very strong, and now they're all of a sudden not being aggressive about it, which, well, at least from a consistency perspective, it isn't there. But so I think their inconsistency is more due to sort of the orders coming from the top, President Trump.
So you think there's a lot of that use of the bully pulpit that's keeping things a little bit lower?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what it seems like. Obviously, I don't know what's happening behind the scenes, or maybe they have a new rationale. But certainly, the last quarter's growth rate was very high, above 4%, I believe, and that should be a great opportunity to raise interest rates, because they need higher interest rate when the economy starts to slow down, because by lowering interest rates, at least according to today's standard philosophy on economics, lower interest rates causes economic growth.
What about the rigging of this economy for those who have wealth and capital? And there is this disparity. Everybody talks about income inequality and the fact that wages are not rising. Do you have an answer to that in Optimizing America?
First of all, the system is rigged from the sense that money is only created for wealthy people. Wealthy people are the only people who qualify for loans, and therefore money is printed for them and their purposes. And obviously, there's such a disparity even in the wealthy people that the majority of loans are given to the top 1% for their much larger opportunities and so on. And furthermore, we have to understand the role of technology in creating income disparity. It is the wealthy people that buy automation, that buy the technology, that buy the robots that replace the poor people that have the lower paying jobs, or that do the labor. And so obviously, in today's world, with advanced technologies, it's the wealthy people who are doing better, and it's the poor people who are getting laid off.
So how do we make the economy benefit more people than it is today? And into the future, when we see more and more automation, what are we going to do? A universal basic income? What do you recommend?
Well, first, I can say that I feel that universal basic income is like a patient with brain cancer taking Advil. The headache might go away, but you still have brain cancer. And the same thing with universal basic income. You can't grow the economy with other people's money, because eventually
you run out of it.
Other people's, right? you need, and this is where you need to go to the Federal Reserve to solve the problem of automation and technology. And it is at the Federal Reserve where money is created. You can start engineering the economy for full employment, for significantly greater growth in the economy. So what I'm proposing is it's a little bit more complicated as you get into what you can actually do from an engineering and a design perspective once you get control of the Federal Reserve. But basic income, what I call it, is direct deposits from the Federal Reserve that goes into every citizen's pocket. And these will be small amounts, and the purpose isn't to create a basic income. The purpose of those direct deposits is to create an economy that thrives, that creates more jobs. Think about it this way. Right now, every day, for a very long time, 60,000 homeless people in New York City go into shelters every night, and there's more that don't. Now, if every one of those homeless people had $3 in their pockets every night, all of a sudden those shelters become opportunities for employment. They become opportunities for innovation where, how many services can we provide these homeless people? The whole problem today is that innovation is only for the purpose of serving the wealthy. What happens when the Federal Reserve is redesigned? All of a sudden, innovation can be for the purpose of serving the poor. It turns the economy upside down. But not in a bad way. It just what all I'm saying is that all of a sudden there's also opportunities at the bottom, and that's really the majority of people today. And what that does is it creates massive amounts of jobs. But it also gives us the ability to raise interest rates significantly higher where they probably need to be and should be, which reduces the rate of innovation and may perhaps causes innovation in terms of technological advancement to be more focused on what we need as opposed to what can be afforded when you replace people at work. So, but these are only some of the changes I recommend in my books.
Well, help us to understand the changes that would be required in terms of the thinking and the control of the Federal Reserve in order for anything like a bottom-up approach to really take effect.
I mean, you have bankers running the economy right now. What happens when you put engineers, scientists, mathematicians in there and say, well, this is what we can do for the economy if we run it differently? And I'm not suggesting those would be big changes. I'm talking about very small changes, but the point of the Federal Reserve becomes maximizing work, maximizing standard of living, creating opportunities for the government to run smaller social programs. If we get rid of, but if we start having the government be burdened less by having to create unemployment, social programs, welfare, and so on, all of a sudden the idea of the government running a surplus and getting rid of the national debt becomes a real possibility. There's so many things we can do for America and the world once we kick the bankers out of central banks. And you got to understand, that's the other thing everybody needs to understand, that the Bretton Woods of 1944 created a financial system, a global financial system where commercial banks run the central banks all over the world. So it's not just a problem for America, it's a problem for the whole world.
Do you have anybody in the political hierarchy who would echo or endorse any of what it is that you're suggesting? Or is this an anathema to them because they're in league with these wealthy donors and the like for their own political futures?
It's easy to jump on some conspiracy theory here, but my belief is that it's just part of how history has evolved, and it's just Federal Reserve isn't being run from an innovative perspective. They're not looking for new ideas. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913. It's been here for over 100 years, and it's pretty much been the same. The only major change for the Federal Reserve was when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard back in 1972. But since then, there has been no fundamental changes, and the Federal Reserve has been run the same way. I'm just suggesting it's time we look at the role of the Federal Reserve. It can be much bigger. There's huge opportunities there, and I'm trying to explain to the world what those opportunities are and how we can resolve so many of our problems.
You also say that if we really want peace, it is possible, but only if we change the economic system. So put war, peace, and economics together for us.
Well, first we have to understand that war is a consequence primarily of resources, that there aren't enough resources. Some area, take Syria. It all started with a 5-year drought and the people protesting that the government wasn't doing enough for them, so you had a rebellion. It comes down to resources. Take your conflict. The idea is that if we start running all central banks around the world in this way, resources start becoming much less of a problem, because the number one resource problem in the world is actually money. It isn't water. It isn't food. It is money. Let's take, so while Syria, there's millions of people dead in Syria now because of that war, but right next to Syria is Israel. And guess what they never had? They never had a problem dealing with the drought. In fact, Israel is a desert. It's a green desert. The reason is that they have the technology and the know-how to turn their desert into farmlands and opportunity. So obviously Syria could have been doing the same thing, but because of economics, they were not able to. This is what I am saying when I say that it is possible for us to end the never-ending war, because with proper economics, we can end the problems we have with resources around the world.
You suggest that the Federal Reserve holds the key to the issue of abundance, but it enforces scarcity in our society. So help us in the closing moments that we have with you to describe what policies might be put into place that would really encourage that abundance as opposed to scarcity.
Let's take America, where this is the wealthiest country in the world, and despite that, 200,000 people every year die because of some consequence of poverty. Now, let's take a specific example, Puerto Rico, for example, which is in dire straits today. They have a massive debt. They have still yet to recover properly from the hurricane. But Puerto Rico, Detroit, these very poor pockets of America would benefit tremendously from what I call a direct deposit, a very small direct deposit from the Federal Reserve to spur economic growth. Number one, it would be a windfall to an island nation like Puerto Rico of 8 million people. A small deposit from the Federal Reserve to create economic growth wherever people are, especially for an island like Puerto Rico, would be an absolute miracle. Not only would they be able to start paying back down their island debt, for lack of a better word, which is very large, but internally, the Puerto Rican economy would boom because of the new money flowing between people. It is very simple. One additional way I can elaborate is that we need to look at the definition of money in perhaps a new way. My definition of money is that money is work. That if you can think of it in the sense that the amount of time you spend working, you earn money. You can look at it that way. When you look at it that way, so if somebody has $3 in their pocket and they spend it, they are creating work, right? Or another way to look at it is that the accumulation of work is power. So the more money you have, the more power you have. And obviously, America spending $1 trillion on its military a year is why it's the most powerful country in the world. But by defining money as work, and we start distributing money to every citizen, very small amounts, but that means every single citizen is empowered to create work or to have work done for them. So that instead of having people not included in the economic system, this automatically includes them in the system. So instead of poor people being a burden on society, all of a sudden they become an opportunity for society. Instead of Puerto Rico being a burden on the United States, Puerto Rico becomes an opportunity for the United States. Instead of looking at illegal aliens as a burden for the United States, perhaps we can start looking at illegal aliens as an opportunity for the United States. Not that I'm necessarily saying that we should be creating direct deposits for non-citizens, but I do find a correlation between how our economy runs and the fact that most people see foreigners, refugees as burdens as opposed to people and opportunities as people should be looked at.
Jarl, in closing, your book is called Optimizing America. Where should we imagine you stand as it relates to nationalism, America first, or globalization, and the impacts of that on the economic system, not only in the United States, but across the globe?
If we're going to create a peaceful world, if we're going to create a better world for our kids, if we're going to evolve out of our current economic problems, I don't think nationalism is an answer. I think globalization could be a fantastic answer for everybody, but people have to understand the economics behind it. I'll go into a little explanation about global trade, for example. China is getting bashed right now by the president, but the president's policies are creating more problems with trade with China, because here's the simple deal. As long as the government, our national government, is spending more money and borrowing money from China in order to spend more money than it collects in taxes, then there will continue to be a disparity in trade or a trade deficit with China. And the reason is very simple. And people can understand this, then you can understand why the policies are ridiculous. Because here it is. When we buy Chinese products, we send paper money to China. Now, China can either sit on paper money and risk inflation, or have the money sit there unproductively, or they have two choices. They can buy American products, which means that there wouldn't be a trade deficit. It would also mean that American workers would get to work making products for China. But instead, what does China do with American dollars? They buy America's national debt. That's the source of the global trade problem, is America's national debt. If other countries, especially China, were not able to buy our national debt, our treasury bonds, there wouldn't be a trade deficit. China would be forced to take those American dollars and buy American products and put Americans back to work. So instead, Trump created $1 trillion deficit, creating, an even bigger trade problem. So I think, again, it comes down to economics.
In closing, because we have got to run at this point, you say there is an ideal president, and he or she does exist. What are you trying to say to us?
Well, that was sort of a figurative idea. I think it was from a social post. I'm trying to say that Justin Wolfe, the lead character in Optimizing America, he exists in the book.
Okay, he does. Well, let's see if he can exist in the real world at some point. I thank you so much, Jarl, for being with us. Jarl Jensen. The book is called Optimizing America, a political thriller. And if people want to read some of your other work, tell us how they can find it.
Yeah, I have an author central page on Amazon. They can look for my name, Jarl Jensen, Jarl, Jen at the end. I also have a website, Optimizing America, where there's links and a blog on a host of different topics, mostly economic. And I also have a third book, which is called America's History of Empowering Wealth. Learn a little bit more about Bretton Woods and how that impacted the whole world by creating this financial system that's basically causing all the countries of the world to run through this central bank system. And I have more books coming out with more ideas for our economy and more descriptive storytelling about why things aren't working out for us.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us today on America Trends.
Thanks for having me. It was real interesting.
Okay. Thank you.